Chapter 6092. Bachan's expression was solemn. He didn't hide anything in front of his friends. Today's matter indeed made him feel that the resistance to establishing the dark, sacred assembly was much greater than they had imagined. He originally wanted to take this opportunity to persuade everyone so that things wouldn't be so serious. However, the other party's attitude was very firm. They didn't even have the chance to persuade them. Looking at Bachan's solemn expression, Shangguan Ying and Wenziren understood that this matter wasn't so optimistic. Hong Zhuang, what's going on? Can you tell us quickly? Shangguan Ying turned her attention to Bailey Hongzhuang. Her delicate face couldn't hide her worry. As friends, they really wanted to help. However, in the face of such a big matter, they clearly understood that their strength was too small. Bailey Hongzhuang didn't hide anything. We waited for a day, but no one came. As soon as she said this, Shangguan Ying and Wenziren were stunned at first. They only felt that the situation wasn't as complicated as they thought. However, after thinking about it carefully, they felt that the situation seemed to be even worse. So, this shows their attitude? Shangguan Ying asked tentatively. Bailey Hongzhuang nodded slightly. That's right. I'm afraid it's impossible to persuade them. Then what should we do now? Wenziren scratched his head. He only felt that the situation was far more troublesome than they had imagined. In this way, it seemed that they couldn't find any direction at all. At this time, Bachan suddenly said, "Let's establish it directly in 3 days." His magnetic voice had a charming charm. It was as pleasant as the sound of nature. However, when everyone heard the content clearly, they couldn't help but be stunned. Their eyes were full of astonishment. "Bachan, you mean to announce the establishment directly?" Wenziren was stunned. Bachan nodded. "Now that the news has been announced, since it's imperative, why worry so much? We've already sent out invitations. It's fine if they don't want to come. They'll definitely come in 3 days." "That's true, but, Bachan, have you really thought this through?" Ziren's usual joking expression was replaced with an extremely serious one. Bachan was his good brother. If something went wrong this time, they would not be able to bear the consequences. "I've thought about it." Bachan smiled faintly, his expression unreadable. "From the day I chose to establish it, I had already thought about all of this. Just because someone is against it doesn't mean that everyone is against it. I believe that there will still be people who will support it. There are so many dark attribute cultivators standing behind us. How can we bear to disappoint them?" Bailey Hongzhuang and the other two fell silent. Although it had only been a few days since the news had spread, the faces of all the dark attribute cultivators who had come were brimming with excitement. Especially after knowing the danger they would face, not a single one of them chose to back down. Even Wenziren, who was not a dark attribute cultivator, felt touched by their unity, let alone Bachan and Bailey Hongzhuang. "Bachan, since you've already decided, as your brother, I'll definitely support you." Wenziren smiled. "I'll go tell everyone to spread the news. Thank you for your hard work. You two must be tired today. Go back and have a good rest." Chapter 6093. Currently, Emperor Cloud City was already packed with people from various powers. Hence, the speed at which this news spread far exceeded everyone's expectations. Even if everyone already knew the news, when Bachan really released the news, everyone couldn't help but feel surprised. Bachan is really bold. He's announcing the establishment of the Dark Church in 3 days. The various large guilds haven't even expressed their stance yet. I think the reason why Bachan left these 3 days is to give the leaders of the major guilds some time to react, right? Actually, as long as the various large guilds' attitudes remain unchanged, it's all the same. The newly established Dark Sacred Assembly is no match for the 7 large guilds. These dark attribute cultivators are really bold. When the time comes, they'll definitely face a devastating blow. Sarcastic remarks were everywhere in Emperor Cloud City. Everyone was watching this matter with the mentality of watching a good show. The reason they had come here was to watch the development of this matter. As for taking action, they didn't need to do anything. The 7 large guilds would deal with this matter directly. This was because everyone understood that this order was maintained by the 7 large guilds. When such a thing happened, the 7 large guilds' attitude would be the most resolute. Shao family, Shao Yanlong and Jun Hongqing sat together. The two of them didn't go to Emperor Cloud City, but they were well aware of the city's situation from the constant updates they receive. This Di Baichen is really stubborn. He's announcing the establishment of the Dark Church. The Di family didn't stop him. Shao Yanlong had a smug smile on his face, and he seemed extremely relaxed. Ever since the end of his training in the primordial battlefield, he hadn't felt so relaxed. The Di family was like a mountain pressing down on his heart, making it impossible for him to feel at ease. Only, he hadn't expected that the heavens would give him such a good opportunity. With the 7 large guilds taking action, the Di family and Lin family might not even need to worry about it. If they couldn't, then they'd have to clean up the mess. It wasn't easy for Di Yujue to find this son of his. I'm afraid that he only knows how to dote on him and agree to whatever he wants. However, he doesn't know that this will not only harm Di Baichen, but also implicate the entire family. Jun Hongqing chuckled. Indeed, success and failure were all due to the same cause. The Di family's reputation had soared because of Di Baichen, but it was also because of Di Baichen that they had fallen into such a situation. Let's wait patiently. There will be a good show in 3 days. The guild leaders of the major guilds were the most furious when they heard the news. They had thought that Di Baichen would be more tactful and give up on the idea of inviting him. However, they didn't. It was only the 2nd day, and Di Baichen had decided to establish it in 3 days. He didn't put them in his eyes at all. This is too much. Luo Qinghao couldn't hold back the anger in his heart after hearing the news. Since Di Baichen has made up his mind to do this, then we have no choice but to be impolite. Yanyi nodded and said with a livid face, if he announces the establishment of the Dark Church in 3 days, then we'll wait until that day to go and make this impossible. Song Langtian sighed faintly. Di Baichen's temper was too unyielding. This approach was tantamount to intensifying the original conflict. Chapter 6094. The 3-day deadline arrived as promised. During this period of time, everything around the Dark Sacred Assembly had been completed. A huge square was located near the Dark Sacred Assembly. This was the place where the Dark Attribute members could listen to the President's speech. It was also the place where the Dark Sacred Assembly was announced today. Early in the morning, the entire Emperor Cloud City seemed to have been awakened. It was extremely lively. Everyone couldn't hold back their curiosity and walked toward the dark square. They understood that there would be a good show today, the most lively show in the entire upper realm. All the major powers arrived one after another. The inns and restaurants in the entire Emperor Cloud City were already full. Many people could only spend the night outside the city. However, this didn't stop the enthusiasm of the crowd. If they missed such a lively occasion, it would be a lifelong regret. If Di Baichen came to Emperor Cloud City, he would find many familiar faces here. Almost all the powers he met during his daily training were here. Murong Jing and the others had been worried since they arrived, while Nangong Yuqing and the others were here to watch a good show. I really didn't expect this news to be true. Murong Jing couldn't help but sigh. Even now that he had arrived in Emperor Cloud City, he still felt unreal. It hadn't been long since the training in the ancient battlefield. He had never heard Di Baichen mention this matter before. He didn't expect it to be true all of a sudden. For them, there were no signs at all. They couldn't help worrying, but it seemed like there was nothing they could do to help. Baichen is really a godlike man. Jiang Wenyan sighed with emotion. I was still in seclusion. As soon as I heard the news, I hurried over. It's fine if he doesn't make a sound, but when he does, he amazes everyone. Chen Feng sighed with emotion. He had seen a lot of geniuses in the past, but only Di Beichen and Bailey Hongzhuang were able to shock him like this. Jiang Wenyan shook his head. I feel that they are usually quite amazing. Now, it's not just amazing, it's terrifying. Not to mention the younger generation, even their parents wouldn't have the courage to do something like this. However, Di Beichen had done it. Thinking about it carefully, he was probably the only person in the entire upper realm capable of doing something like this. Murong Jing, Jiang Wenyan, this is great. Di Beichen is going to do something so heinous. Are you still planning to support him? Nangong Yuqing couldn't help but interrupt Murong Jing and the others who were talking. Normally Di Beichen and the others were like brothers. Now that such a big thing had happened, this so-called alliance. Hearing this voice, Murong Jing and the others couldn't help but turn around. Seeing Nangong Yuqing's smug expression, their faces sank. This guy had been taught a lesson by Beichen for so long, yet he was still jumping around. Nangong Yuqing, don't say I didn't warn you. You've been suppressed by Beichen for so long. Previously, Beichen was focused on Jun Lingxuan and couldn't be bothered to make a move against you. Now that Jun Lingxuan is gone, if you continue to be so happy, I'm afraid you'll have a tragic end. Chapter 6095. Nangong Yuqing clearly hadn't expected Jiang Wenyan to say such words to him. He blanked for a moment before his face turned ashen. His voice was heavy and filled with unwillingness as he glared at Jiang Wenyan. I didn't expect that you would still refuse to give up at this time. The major guilds won't let Di Beichen off. At that time, let alone Di Beichen, even the Di family and the Lin family will suffer a huge blow. It's impossible for Di Beichen to deal with me. Jiang Wenyan's expression sank. Even if he didn't like Di Beichen, he couldn't help but worry about Di Beichen's current situation. At this time, Murong Jing said, Nangong Yuqing, didn't you always think that Beichen wasn't your opponent? What happened in the end? Don't be too confident. Otherwise, the one who will end up as a joke will be you, Chen Feng added lazily. You! Nangong Yuqing pointed at the three people in front of him. These three were echoing each other, making it impossible for him to win. You will regret this. The three of them sneered but no longer paid any attention to him. This Nangong Yuqing used to be an outstanding person. However, for some unknown reason, he has become more and more despicable in the past 2 years. Maybe he's depressed from being bullied by Beichen. When Nangong Yuqing turned around to leave, he heard Chen Feng and Jiang Wenyan's discussion and immediately staggered. You're the one who's depressed from being bullied. Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichen sat quietly in the headquarters of the Dark Sacred Assembly, looking at the changes in the sky. Soon, the appointed time would arrive. Bai Li Yanche, Linger, and the others were beside them. Everyone was clearly gathered together, but none of them spoke. The atmosphere was so heavy that it seemed as if even the air had frozen. Young Master D, Miss Bailey, long time no see. Suddenly, a voice broke the silence. Bailey Hongzhuang turned around and saw a familiar figure that she hadn't seen for a long time, Ouyang Jifeng. Young Master Ouyang? Bailey Hongzhuang stood up, her face as elegant as a lotus flower rising out of the water, slightly surprised. Back then, he met Ouyang Jifeng at the alchemy competition, but it was said that later on, he put most of his energy into alchemy, so the number of times they met was not many. However, today's matter was so sensational that it wasn't strange for him to appear here. The only thing they didn't expect was that he would actually come looking for them. Are you surprised to see me? Ouyang Jifeng smiled faintly. Di Beichen spread out his hands. His devilish face was very calm, and no one could tell what he was thinking. Please sit. Ouyang Jifeng took the opportunity to sit down and said, Actually, I didn't come here for any other reason. I just admire your courage. When I first heard the news, I was very shocked. I couldn't connect you to this matter at all. Now, it seems that your courage is really something ordinary people don't have. Young Master Ouyang, you flatter us. Actually, we are also worried now. Bailey Hongzhuang smiled faintly. Even if she didn't have much contact with Ouyang Jifeng, she also understood that this person wasn't a person with complicated thoughts. There was no need to be too afraid. To be honest, my big brother is also of the dark attribute. All these years, because of his attribute, he rarely appeared in the eyes of the world. He is also a genius, but because of this matter, his future was ruined in vain. Chapter 6096. Ouyang Jifeng had a warm smile on his face, but his eyes were very serious. Bailey Hongzhuang could even see the sadness in his eyes. She never knew that Ouyang Jifeng had such an elder brother, but after thinking about Huang Futing's situation, she could understand. With Huang Futing's position in the family, he still chose to leave. It was not strange that Ouyang Jifeng had such an elder brother. In fact, they believed that every force had dark attribute cultivators, but they had always lived in the dark and no one had ever noticed. Thank you. Di Bei Chen's lips slowly raised into a smile. At this time, even a word of support was rare and precious. Because of this matter, many forces that wanted to be on good terms with the family took the opportunity to retreat, as if everything before was illusory. It was because of this that support at this time was even more precious. Ouyang Jifeng felt the change in Di Beichen's attitude. His smile became brighter and his eyes were firm. I will do my best for this matter. As soon as these words came out, Bailey Hongzhuang and the others were all stunned, and some even doubted what they had heard. I am the young master of the Ouyang family. I can represent the Ouyang family. Ouyang Jifeng's voice rang out once again, making everyone understand that he was serious about what he said. Di Beichen stared at Ouyang Jifeng. His sharp eyes seemed to be able to see through people's hearts. After a while, he smiled and slowly stretched out his right hand. Welcome, ally. Thank you. Ouyang Jifeng shook Di Beichen's hand. Both of them used a lot of strength. When they shook hands, their bones protruded slightly, showing their persistence and faith. When they sat down again, everyone's attitude towards Ouyang Jifeng had changed. They were more intimate. Actually, the current situation is very worrying. I heard some news. A few days ago, the leaders of the 7 major guilds had gathered in the Holy Light Assembly. They must be discussing this matter. Although there hasn't been any movement in the past 2 days, I can be sure that they will appear today. Ouyang Jifeng said in a deep voice. This is also within my expectations. Di Beichen's expression was calm. The reason why he directly announced it was because of this. Since they would come sooner or later, they might as well appear together. If they could survive today, they would get better and better in the future. If they couldn't, he would never let such a thing happen. The 7 major guilds will never agree to this. After the incident, the upper realms set a rule. Only the 7 major guilds will not allow the rise of the dark attribute. When my elder brother decided on the dark attribute, we were not convinced and wanted to take the opportunity to change. But later, reality told us that it was too difficult. Perhaps we didn't have such courage back then, but you did. You've done too many things beyond my imagination. What do you think they will do? Di Beichen raised his eyebrows. Ouyang Jifeng muttered, I think they will appear directly and stop the establishment of the Dark Sacred Assembly. Your direct announcement has angered them. If we guessed wrong, they will definitely bring people here today to destroy the headquarters of the Dark Sacred Assembly and interrupt its establishment. Once you resist, your entire family will be implicated. Chapter 6097. So, the most important thing is still strength, Di Beichen said slowly. This matter could be said to be simple, but it could also be said to be difficult. As long as they were strong enough to suppress the leaders of the 7 major guilds, then all these difficulties would be nothing. This was because this was a world controlled by the strong. Your family should have many strong people, right? Ouyang Jifeng looked at Di Beichen seriously. As far as I know, the strongest among the 7 major guilds are President Lu and President Lei of the Thunder Attribute Guild. As long as we can suppress them, then this matter will be much easier to resolve. Bachen's eyes were as dark as the night. He had also discussed this matter with his father, and their thoughts were almost the same. The strength of the guild leaders could never be underestimated. When they joined forces, their strength would be extremely terrifying. Young master, it's time, Huang Fu-ting reminded as he looked at the sky outside. Bachen nodded slightly, then slowly walked out of the dark sacred assembly's door, and walked toward the square behind. At this moment, the square was already surrounded by people. Almost all the people who were rarely seen on normal days had appeared here. This scene could not even be compared to the Light Saint's succession ceremony. When that noble and oppressive figure appeared, everyone's eyes fell on him. He was a man full of magic. Wherever he appeared, everyone's eyes would involuntarily be attracted to him. And today, he was the main character. He wore a black robe with red burning flames embroidered on the tail of the robe. A fiery red flame belt was tied around his waist, making his tall figure seem even more outstanding. His face had always been extremely good-looking. The entire upper realm knew that Bachen was famous for being a handsome man. When they saw him today, everyone could not help but be captivated by his handsome face. It was a shockingly handsome face. His facial features seemed to be carved by the heavens. The contours of his face were as sharp as a knife, cold and hard but not lacking in handsomeness. A pair of eyes containing a mysterious light restrained this fierce and frightening light. With just a glance, people could not help but lower their heads, not daring to look at those eyes containing powerful strength. Under the gazes of countless people, he quietly appeared on the high platform as if he was taking a leisurely stroll. Looking at that proud figure, the people who originally wanted to ridicule him inexplicably felt their lips dry up. They could not say what they wanted to say. This aura had already surpassed them by too much. Ridicule? What right did they have to ridicule someone who was more outstanding than them in many aspects? Yujue and the others looked at Bachen on the high platform, and their hearts were filled with pride. Having such a son was really something to be proud of. Even if what happened next was beyond their expectations, they were prepared to deal with it. Bailey Hongzhuang stood below the stage, looking at the man on the stage, her clear eyes overflowing with satisfaction and worship. She admired this man. She admired his courage, his wisdom, and everything about him. She was even more grateful because this was her man. Shangguan Yingying stood beside Bailey Hongzhuang and whispered, "Hongzhuang, look, the Xiao family and the Jun family are there." Chapter 6098. Xiao Sou didn't come. Bailey Hongzhuang quietly retracted her gaze. Shangguan Yingying nodded her head. "Looks like the news we heard is correct. Xiao Sou is really pregnant. She must be nursing the fetus at home and doesn't want everyone to know about this. Otherwise, how could she not appear at such a lively time?" As expected. On the high platform, Bachen looked at the dense crowd below and said with a calm expression, "Thank you everyone for coming here to witness the establishment of the Dark Sacred Assembly." Just one sentence ignited the hearts of everyone below the stage. "Behind me are all darkness-type cultivators." Bachen pointed his finger to the back of the high platform. Behind them was also a dense crowd of people. However, everyone was wearing the Dark Guild's uniform and could be recognized at a glance. When so many people gathered together, the scene was extremely spectacular. Huang Fu-ting and the rest stood in the crowd, wearing clothes that showed their identity. Everyone's heart was filled with pride. At least today, they didn't have to hide and worry about being discriminated against because of their attribute. Today, they could openly stand here and tell everyone that they were darkness attribute cultivators and that they were fearless. Because of the calamity back then, the darkness attribute had been silent for too many years. Every darkness attribute cultivator was implicated. All these years they were like rats on the street and lived very miserably. But Bachen emphasized his tone. "What happened back then had nothing to do with anyone behind me. Because of what happened in the past, they suffered for so many years. This kind of life that couldn't see the light of day is not something that everyone here can understand. Since there are 8 attributes in the world, then there shouldn't be only 7 major guilds, but 8 major guilds. Therefore, today, I announce that the Dark Sacred Assembly is officially established. Following Debachen's words, the Darkness Attribute cultivators cheered one after another. The heaven-shaking cheers stunned everyone present. This momentum was too shocking, far beyond their imagination. All along, no one had placed the Darkness Attribute cultivators in their eyes. In their eyes, these people were just a pile of loose sand and couldn't do anything. However, when this group of people gathered together, they realized that this was also a force that couldn't be underestimated. Most importantly, from these people's eyes, they could see the passion that they hadn't felt for a long time. They even noticed that these people's eyes were filled with fanatical worship when they looked at Debachen. That kind of worship was like the worship of believers toward the Lord. They believed from the bottom of their hearts. This kind of situation was the dream of almost every person in power, but everyone knew that it was almost impossible to achieve this. However, Debachen really did it. Xiao Yanlong and Jun Hongqing couldn't help but look at each other. They seemed to have underestimated Debachen's preparations. Even they felt that this kind of trust was terrifying. These believers were probably blind to Debachen. That kind of fanaticism made it seem that no matter what Debachen asked them to do, they would be willing to do it, even if it meant giving up their lives. Chapter 6099. I didn't notice Debachen's preparations in this regard before. I didn't expect him to be able to do it to this extent. Xiao Yanlong's heart was filled with shock. This Debachen made him feel very scared. Just the increase in his cultivation in the past 2 years was already very shocking. How could he have the time to not set up such a big trap at this time? Even if they put all their effort into it, it would not be easy to do it, but Debachen had done it. Now he could only hope that the Dark Sacred Assembly would not be established successfully. Otherwise, once it succeeded, the Dark Sacred Assembly would completely become the D family's backing. Even if it was in the name of the Sacred Assembly, because of Debachen's existence, the two had almost merged into one. In addition to Bailey Hongzhuang's weight in the Light Sacred Assembly, with the support of the Dark Sacred Assembly and the Light Sacred Assembly, the D family might directly become the #1 family in the upper realm. In the past, he would only think about this in his dreams. It was too difficult to achieve this, but unknowingly, the D family had fulfilled all of this. As long as the Dark Sacred Assembly was successfully established today, then all of this would only be a matter of time. Once this child grows up, he will be very terrifying. Jun Hongqing's face was gloomy. Looking at the stunning figure on the high platform, his mood was extremely complicated. Previously, he had never understood how his son could not compare to Debachen. Why was it that every time he went out to train, he would be defeated by Debachen? This time, he understood. The two of them looked at each other, countless thoughts flashing through their minds. Thinking about all the things that had happened over the years, they felt even more depressed and regretful. Don't worry, he won't succeed. After a long while, Jun Hongqing suddenly said. Xiao Yanlong nodded slightly. The possibility of this kind of thing succeeding was too low. Debachen indeed could not succeed. But for some reason, if the person standing on the high platform was someone else, they would be almost certain of the result. However, at this moment, the one standing on the high platform was Debachen. Their hearts were inexplicably uncertain. From now on, the upper realm will have one more elemental guild, the Dark Sanctum. This is the home of all Darkness Attribute cultivators. Here, everyone can also obtain the Darkness Attribute cultivation method. Debachen smiled confidently. He believed in everyone's talent and strength. Even if the current Darkness Attribute cultivators were much weaker than the other guilds, Shifeng was confident that many outstanding Darkness Attribute cultivators would emerge in time. Dark Sacred Assembly! Dark Sacred Assembly! All the cultivators of the Sacred Assembly shouted in unison. Their faces were filled with passion, and their hearts were filled with excitement. Some people couldn't help but shed tears. They had been fighting alone for so many years, and now they had finally found an organization. From now on, even if the situation was difficult, at least everyone would be together. Moreover, they all believed that under the leadership of their guild master, they would definitely get better and better. Bei Chen's face was overflowing with a confident smile. His handsome and peerless face became even more elegant. He was like a god, exuding a noble and arrogant aura. Everyone's eyes could not help but be attracted. It was obviously an extremely young face, but it revealed a power that looked down on the world, making people not dare to look at him directly. Chapter 6100. It took a lot of courage to face those soul-stirring eyes. Everyone stared at this scene in a daze. Clearly, many people wanted to stop the Dark Sacred Assembly before it was announced, but for some reason, none of them took action until now. Looking at Bei Chen, who was speaking frankly on the high platform, Xiao Yanlong couldn't help but feel anxious. Why hasn't the 7 Sacred Assemblies guild leaders appeared yet? If they still didn't appear, then the establishment of the Dark Sacred Assembly would be regarded as a tacit agreement, and it would be even more difficult to stop it in the future. Don't worry, they're here. A smile appeared on Junhong Cheng's face. His originally anxious face suddenly relaxed, and unconcealable joy appeared on his face. Xiao Yanlong was slightly stunned, and after sensing the tyrannical auras, he quietly breathed a sigh of relief. Dark Sacred Assembly, we disagree. Just as Bei Chen was speaking frankly and confidently, introducing the Dark Sacred Assembly's purpose to everyone, a cold and dignified voice suddenly resounded, exploding on the high platform like thunder, clearly entering the ears of everyone present. Following the appearance of this voice, the entire plaza seemed to freeze for a moment. Everyone's mind trembled. Immediately after, they noticed that 7 figures had suddenly appeared on the high platform. Facing these figures, everyone didn't find them unfamiliar, because they were none other than the guild leaders of the 7 great guilds. Luo Qinghao stared coldly at Bei Chen and spoke again. We disagree with the establishment of the Dark Sacred Assembly. Hongzhuang. Shangguan Yingying couldn't help but look at Bailey Hongzhuang, her eyes filled with urgency. Bailey Hongzhuang's body tensed up when the guild leaders of the 7 great guilds appeared. Even though she had long since expected such a situation, she couldn't help but feel nervous when it truly happened. Let's watch first. Bailey Hongzhuang suppressed the complicated thoughts in her heart and calmed down. Diyu Jue, Lin Wenlan, and the others also tensed up, their eyes fixed on the high platform. As long as the situation on the high platform was slightly off, they would definitely take action immediately. No matter what, they couldn't let anything happen to Bei Chen. Bei Chen was neither servile nor overbearing as he faced the 7 people from the upper realm, who were of extremely high status. The corners of his lips even curled up slightly. He raised his eyebrows slightly, but his eyes, which were as deep as a lake, were unfathomable. What do the presidents think? Luo Qinghao slowly narrowed his eyes as he looked at Bei Chen's unmoved appearance. This was not the first time he had seen Bei Chen. He had seen Bei Chen at the succession ceremony of the Holy Maiden of Light. Although this young man was the young master of the D family, he felt that if this young man did not have this identity, he would not be worthy of the Saint of Light. However, now that he was really looking at Bei Chen, he realized that he was also a young man who could not be underestimated. At the very least, his mental fortitude was incomparable to that of an ordinary person. It's impossible for the Dark Sacred Assembly to be established. Feng Youxian's face was ashen. Her indifferent face was alienated, but her cold voice was filled with an undeniable meaning. As the guild leader of the water faction, Feng Youxian was extremely strong and had a noble status. However, she had never liked anyone. She was already famous for being as cold as ice. At this moment, her words were filled with a coldness that pushed people thousands of miles away. Chapter 6101. Why? Bachin spoke unhurriedly. His devilishly handsome face did not show any anger because of the 7 presidents' plans. On the contrary, it was as calm as a spring breeze. His calm appearance made it seem as if he was discussing the weather today and gently asking for everyone's opinion. Such a reaction was clearly beyond the expectations of Feng Yuxian and the others. Compared to their aggressive attitude, Bachin's attitude made them speechless. It was as if you went to kill someone, but the person poured you a cup of tea and enthusiastically asked you what you were doing here today. This. Could you say it out loud? What do you mean why? Luo Qinghao's expression was somewhat unnatural. This Bachin really did not play by the rules. It made him feel like he had used the wrong strength and was very uncomfortable. In short, it's not allowed to be established. A few days ago, I wanted to invite several presidents to discuss this matter, but it seemed that you were not willing to give me any pointers. Since you are here today, I also want to know why there are only 7 major guilds even though there are 8 attribute. Why can't dark attribute cultivators have their own guilds? What did we do wrong to deserve such a punishment? The magnetic voice was filled with warmth and gentleness. It was clearly a question, but because the voice was so pleasant to the ears, no one felt that it was aggressive. On the contrary, this question after question made everyone unable to help but think about the answer. Feng Yuxian and the others did not expect such a situation to occur. These questions made it difficult for them to answer. Dark attribute cultivators are too dangerous. The catastrophe back then almost destroyed the entire upper realm, so from then on, the upper realm stopped the establishment of the Dark Sacred Assembly. Lu Hongwei's voice rang out. His wise eyes looked straight at Bachin. He had always known that the latter was a smart child. Today's reaction was indeed eye-catching. It did not cause the conflict to erupt immediately. Instead, it eased it a little. However, no matter what, today's result could not be changed. That kind of thing happened back then only proved that some dark attribute cultivators had bad intentions. It does not mean that everyone is like that. Presidents, look at the young people behind me. They are all dark attribute cultivators. All these years, they have endured things that they did not need to endure at all. They have always struggled to survive under everyone's supercilious eyes and ridicule. Some were clearly favored by the heavens, but they were forced to leave their families because of such gazes. Some had happy families, but they left heartbroken because they did not want to implicate their families. Those who were able to appear here were already lucky, because many dark attribute cultivators lost their lives because of discrimination and oppression, or chose to commit suicide because they could not bear such gazes. Why are they being punished for something that happened hundreds of years ago? Don't tell me, they don't even have the chance to raise their heads as human beings? They can't even find a place to rest under the sun? It was as if he was lamenting the unfairness of the world. As if he was lamenting the unfairness of the world, of course, of the deceased. They were never unpardonable evildoers. They just wanted to work hard to live. Chapter 6102. Bailey Hongzhuang looked at Bachin and couldn't help but clench her hands. Her heart was also touched by this, and she felt an indescribable heartache. These days, because more and more darkness attribute cultivators had gathered here, they began to understand their situation more and more. It was because they understood that they felt even more heartache. Compared to them, the people who followed Huang Futing were already living a good life. Because they lived in groups, even if someone wanted to bully them, they would have to think twice. Some cultivators who were left alone lived like a joke. That kind of miserable situation was not something you could imagine. This situation made them even more determined. They had to do everything they could to change everything. Not only for He Shinjuan's last wish, but also to follow their hearts. This was something they wanted to do from the bottom of their hearts. D. Bachan's words were the thoughts of all the darkness attribute cultivators. The painful experiences of these years flashed through their mind. That kind of pain was not something that people of the other attributes could understand. They had suffered too many years of discrimination. They would be woken up in the middle of the night. Many people had never had a good night's sleep. The feeling of waking up in the middle of the night covered in cold sweat was really uncomfortable. Dujua's eyes shined brightly. This kind of D. Bachan was a rare treasure in their eyes. Perhaps in the eyes of others, doing such a thing was simply a thankless task, but this kind of pure heart was extremely precious to them. They were proud of D. Bachan. Ouyang Jifeng's hands couldn't help but tremble. If everyone saw this scene, they would be very happy. As the younger brother, he would do his best to facilitate this so that his big brother would not fall into darkness forever. Almost everyone who disagreed with this matter felt as if a huge stone had been placed on their hearts after hearing this. Emotions were contagious, especially when D. Bachan's words were so exaggerated. Thinking of the situation of the darkness attribute cultivators in these years, everyone felt very miserable. Thinking about it carefully, this was just the result of the situation. It had nothing to do with these young people. Actually, I really agree with Bachan's approach. These people really don't have it easy. It's time to change this situation. Jiang Wenyan's expression was solemn. He had never expressed his stance, but in reality, his heart was already on the dark sacred assembly's side. Many things continued not because they were right, but because no one could break the deadlock. As long as someone could break this stalemate, then there was still a chance for everything to turn around. These 2 days I've been listening to them talk about their situation. It's really sad. Murong Jing nodded. In the past, he had never paid much attention to these things. It was only after carefully understanding the situation that he realized how sad it was. The guild leader, who had originally intended to reject D. Bachan, hesitated for a moment. Everything D. Bachan said was reasonable, and they had no way to refute him. It was not that they were unaware of such a situation, but for the sake of the stability of the upper realm, they could only sacrifice a portion of their benefits. In this world where the strong preyed on the weak, those without strength could only be slaughtered. Chapter 6103. Feng Yuxian and the others heaved a sigh of relief when they heard Lei Ming's words. Their initial panic also dissipated at this moment. Not establishing the dark sacred assembly will only suppress their development to a certain extent, but it won't give them any hope of survival. Lei Ming's eyes were cold, and his cold face was devoid of any emotion. Compared to the catastrophe caused by dark attribute cultivators, such a choice should be made. Young man, you've just arrived in the upper realm not long ago. Newborn calves are not afraid of tigers, which is why you're fearlessly doing such a thing. Let me tell you, the matters of the upper realm are not as simple as you think. The rules that have been passed down for so many years naturally have their reasons. In short, we can't agree to the dark sacred assembly. As long as we don't agree, it can't be established successfully. Lei Ming's cold voice ruthlessly pierced the hearts of every dark attribute cultivator present. For a moment, everyone looked at Lei Ming with resentment. However, Lei Ming did not care at all. No one is willing to be a sacrifice. I understand how you feel, but because of the danger of the dark attribute, this is the only way. No matter how unfair you think it is, this is a fact that cannot be changed. Just like how some people are born with disabilities and some people are destined to be unable to cultivate, you are destined to be dark attribute cultivators. These things are essentially the same. Therefore, don't do such a meaningless thing to challenge authority. Instead of throwing your lives away like this, it's better to live like how you did before. His cold words were like ice, carrying a terrifying lethality. They pierced the hearts that had been reignited with hope until they were dripping with blood. These words were obviously extremely cruel, but they were somewhat reasonable, making it impossible for them to refute. They were indeed unwilling to become sacrifices, and were unwilling to receive such treatment because of their attributes. However, when they thought about those cultivators who were born with problems, they could not tell whose situation was worse. Below the high platform, Xiao Yanlong and Jun Hongqing both sighed in relief. Their tightly clenched fists gradually loosened. Di Beichen's words were too convincing. Even they were moved for a moment, especially when they sensed that the thoughts of everyone around them had changed. They were really worried that everyone would be moved by Di Beichen's words. They could not bear such an outcome at all. Fortunately, Lei Ming's attitude made them feel at ease. Why? This is too unfair to us. Below the high platform, some voices of dissatisfaction rang out. Some of them were even angry out of humiliation. They had been oppressed for so many years and endured the supercilious looks that they did not deserve. Yet, President Lei had actually said such cruel words. They could hear the arrogance in his words, and he was looking down on them. On what basis? What qualifications did the other party have to act superior in front of them? Why? Lei Ming laughed softly, but his eyes became increasingly sharp. Because I am stronger than all of you. With just one sentence, the entire square fell silent. Di Beichen's eyes grew increasingly deep. This was his first time meeting President Lei, but he never expected this person's attitude to be so arrogant and conceited. However, he also understood that Thunder had the right to be arrogant because he was one of the strongest among the leaders of the 7 major guilds. Chapter 6104. President Lei, your strength is indeed stronger than the cultivators behind me. Di Beichen slowly raised his head, his piercing eyes looking straight at Lei Ming. His pair of dazzling eyes bloomed with a strong and proud brilliance. However, this doesn't mean that your talent is stronger than theirs, nor does it mean that they can't surpass you in the future. If you were also a dark attribute cultivator, I don't think you would have such strength in such a suppressed environment. The low and magnetic voice had a bewitching charm. Di Beichen's face was cold. The so-called guild president was really a cruel and inhumane guy. You! Lei Ming's eyes darkened and his face was full of anger. He was just a junior, yet he dared to be so rude to him. Living on the verge of death, why should we live on the verge of death? Don't you think it's ridiculous to speak in such a contemptuous tone just because it didn't happen to you? Di Beichen's gaze was as sharp as a knife. If it didn't happen to him, he would never know how painful it was. His situation was much better than the other cultivators of the same attribute, but he also felt the strange gazes from the other cultivators. Because he was with Hong Zhuang, his dark attribute identity was mentioned more often, so he understood this feeling. Di Beichen, are you provoking me? Lei Ming's eyes narrowed slightly, and his face was terrifyingly cold. Do you think you're really the president just because you announced the establishment of the Dark Sacred Assembly here? Do you really have the qualifications to talk to me like this? Hearing the cold threat contained in those words, Di Beichen was not afraid at all. I'm just refuting normally. Could it be that President Lei has been in a high position for a long time, so others can't even say the slightest objection? Lei Ming's face was livid, and the yuan qi in his body gradually surged. This junior who didn't know how to appreciate favors had successfully angered him. Seeing that Lei Ming was about to make a move, Song Langtian suddenly said, President Lei, Di Beichen is just a junior, why bother with him? It's ungentlemanly. Hearing this, Lei Ming restrained the surging yuan qi, glanced at Song Langtian thoughtfully, and then turned his gaze away with a cold snort. Luo Qinghao saw this and said, Don't say more at this time, Di Beichen, I'll give you 2 choices. 1. Immediately announce the dissolution of the guild now and swear never to think about establishing the Dark Sacred Assembly again. I object. Without waiting for Luo Qinghao to finish speaking, Di Beichen's cold and resolute voice had already sounded. Luo Qinghao's face. If the presidents of the 7 major guilds also had a soft spot in their hearts, then this matter might be properly resolved by persuading them with reason and moving them with emotion. But obviously these people were not. They dictated everything and stipulated that everything could only go in the direction they dictated. These selfish guys only cared about their own interests. Chapter 6105. Faced with Di Beichen's resolute attitude, Luo Qinghao's words were stuck in his throat. He did not even have the chance to speak. As the guild leader, no one had ever dared to interrupt him like this. Most importantly, Di Beichen did not give him any face. "You're saying we're selfish?" Luo Qinghao raised his voice, and his gaze became cold and fierce. "Our 7 major guilds have always been working hard to improve the strength of the upper realms cultivators. We selflessly help everyone improve their attribute power. You're saying we're selfish?" Di Beichen's expression did not change. "The reason you're worried about the establishment of the Dark Sacred Assembly is that you think the dark power is too terrifying. Once it grows, you won't be able to control many variables. That's why you're using this as a pretense to suppress it, right? I don't think bad people only appear in the dark attribute. Are all the cultivators of the other attributes good? Such words. I don't think you can say it, right?" His deep and magnetic voice had a mocking tone. Now, it seemed that these guys were just guarding their own benefits and were unwilling to give up any benefit. However, why should they sacrifice everyone with the dark attribute for their benefits? If that's the case, what are you if not selfish? Luo Qinghao's face darkened. He did not expect Di Beichen to be so eloquent. His words pierced through everything mercilessly. Some things were not even noticed by them. However, when Di Beichen said this, he could feel that many people's thoughts had changed. "We can't let this kid continue. This will be very disadvantageous for us," Yan Yi said in a low voice. The upper realm had always been good under the management of their 7 major guilds. No one had ever made any unfavorable remarks. As soon as this kid opened his mouth, he felt that something bad was going to happen. If he was allowed to continue, it would inevitably cause more trouble. Luo Qinghao nodded. His thoughts were the same as Yan Ye's. Feng Yuxian noticed this as well. She immediately said, "Why should we waste our breath on him? Since this kid refuses a toast only to be forced to drink a forfeit, we can only take action." The purpose of coming here today was very clear. It was to stop the establishment of the Dark Sacred Assembly. If words did not work, then they would use force. Destroy the headquarters of the Dark Sacred Assembly and stop the ritual from continuing. Following Feng Yuxian's words, the elemental energy in Lei Ming and the rest's bodies surged. They looked coldly at Di Beichen, and no longer had the politeness from before. The atmosphere was tense, and the battle was on the verge of breaking out. Below the high platform, the expressions of many people changed slightly. It seemed like they were about to take action soon. Even though the process was more complicated than they had imagined, the result was still the same. The elemental energy in Di Beichen's body instantly surged out. His body posture quietly changed, as if he was also prepared for battle. Seeing this, Lu Hongwei sighed faintly. In the end, this was still the result. However, this path was chosen by Di Beichen and the others. Since they had chosen the most difficult path, they should have been mentally prepared to face everything. After being contradicted by Di Beichen, Lei Ming was already unhappy. Now that the time had come, he said coldly, "Since you don't know what's good for you, I'll teach you a lesson." Chapter 6106. Lei Ming's speed was as fast as lightning. As the president of a lightning-type guild, his lightning-type powers were unparalleled. In the blink of an eye, Lei Ming's attack had landed on Di Beichen's position. However, to his surprise, his attack had only grazed the corner of Di Beichen's robes. Di Beichen had managed to dodge it in such a short amount of time. "I've underestimated you." Lei Ming raised an eyebrow with a hint of surprise between his brows. Based on his judgment, Di Beichen's cultivation was only at the Heavenly Moon stage. Based on Di Beichen's age, It was true that he was a genius who had reached such a level of cultivation. However, in front of Lei Ming, this level of power was clearly not enough. However, dodging is only luck, not true power. Di Baichen stared calmly at Lei Ming, completely ignoring the mockery in the latter's words. "You're so much older than me. If you're not more powerful than me, wouldn't that be a great embarrassment? I don't know about anything else, but I'm sure of one thing. If I were to reach your age, I would definitely be more powerful than you." His rose-colored lips were slightly raised, revealing a trace of wickedness and dominance. His pleasant voice rang out, not giving Lei Ming any face at all. "Kid, you're digging your own grave." Lei Ming's gaze turned sharp. Di Baichen had truly angered him. In the next moment, Lei Ming no longer cared about what the others thought and charged forward once again. If he did not kill this kid today, he would never be able to vent the anger in his heart. Below the high platform, Diyu Jue and the others had been paying attention to every single change on the high platform. When they saw that Lei Ming had the intention to kill Di Baichen, Diyu Jue stood up as well. Lei Ming noticed Diyu Jue's actions below the high platform. When he looked at Di Baichen again, a trace of mockery appeared in his eyes. "What, does the Di family head want to fight?" The sudden voice attracted everyone's attention. Only then did they notice Diyu Jue's actions. Obviously, Diyu Jue would not sit idly by while his son was being hunted down. It wasn't just Diyu Jue. Huang Fu Ting and the other dark attribute cultivators couldn't hold themselves back any longer. If not for the fact that Di Baichen had told them not to make a move until he gave the order, they would have already charged forward. Diyu Jue's gaze was fixed on Lei Ming's body. From his expressionless face, everyone could vaguely see some anger. In fact, if it were anyone else whose son was being targeted like this on the high platform, the father would not be able to remain calm. The next moment Lei Ming continued, "Di Baichen, didn't you want to be the president? Could it be that you don't have the strength to be so delusional? Look carefully at all the presidents here, then look at your own strength. Do you have the qualifications to be the president of a guild?" Faced with Lei Ming's questioning, Di Baichen's expression froze. In fact, he also understood that there was a certain gap between his strength and the other president. In fact, he didn't have to be the president. However, the dark attribute cultivators had been suppressed for too many years. Everyone who had lost their cultivation methods generally had low cultivation levels, so there was no other way. Could it be that one can be the president if one is strong? Bailey Hongzhuang leaped and appeared beside Di Baichen. Her shimmering delicate face was raised high with strong confidence and arrogance. "As far as I know, if one wants to be the president other than strength, the most important thing is reputation." Chapter 6107. Huang Fu Ting and the other darkness-attributed cultivators could no longer hold themselves back. When they heard Bailey Hongzhuang's words, they all started shouting, "We support President Di! Only Di Baichen is fit to be the president of the Dark Sacred Assembly. President Di! President Di!" Wave after wave of shouts rang out. None of the darkness-attributed cultivators had ever doubted this point. In their hearts, Di Baichen was the one and only candidate. Di Baichen was the savior who saved them from suffering. Now that the president of the Thunder-attributed guild was pressuring the person they worshipped, they could no longer stand it. "I think this President Lei is the one with a false reputation. I'm afraid that many people in the Thunder-attributed guild have opinions about him, so he can only rely on his strength to intimidate. One look and you can tell that this guy is not the one that everyone wants." The darkness-attributed cultivators were not polite at all. Just based on what Lei Ming had said earlier, they already hated him to the core. Now that he dared to attack their president, everyone wanted nothing more than to rush up and chop him into pieces. However, they also understood that in terms of strength, they were not Lei Ming's match. If they rushed up rashly and distracted President Di, it would be even worse. Lei Ming's face was already gloomy. After hearing these words, His face was already as black as the bottom of a pot. Looking at the black figure in front of him, his eyes narrowed. This was because Bailey Hongzhuang was wearing the dark Sacred Assembly's uniform today. Standing beside Di Beichen, they looked like a pair. The dignified Saintess of Light is actually wearing the dark Sacred Assembly's uniform. You really don't put the light Sacred Assembly in your eyes at all. Have you ever thought about the feelings of those darkness-attributed cultivators? Luo Qinghao and the rest frowned. When they first came, they put all their attention on Di Beichen. Now that they saw Bailey Hongzhuang, they realized how inappropriate this matter was. The Saintess of Light's attire is indeed too much. Feng Youxian's expression turned cold. When she heard that the Saint of Light was going to marry Di Beichen, she was very against it. However, the two of them were already married a long time ago. It was impossible to change this matter even if they wanted to, so they acquiesced. They had never thought that their tacit agreement back then would lead to such a situation. If they had known earlier, they would have opposed it back then. Lu Hongwei's expression was complicated when he saw this. He had always understood how important Di Beichen was to Bailey Hongzhuang, and Bailey Hongzhuang's actions today had made it clear. However, this would indeed put the Holy Light Assembly in an awkward position. President Lu, your Saint of the Light has done such a thing. Are you not going to do anything about it? Yanyi looked at Lu Hongwei. Lu Hongwei had not said anything since they arrived here today. This made Yanyi feel very frustrated. Normally, the Holy Light Guild was the leader of the 7 great guilds. Regardless of the situation, Lu Hongwei was always the leader. However, because this matter was related to Bailey Hongzhuang, the situation changed. In my opinion, Bailey Hongzhuang's actions are completely looking down on the Holy Light Assembly. She doesn't deserve to be the Saintess of Light. Strip her of her identity as the Saintess of Light. She has completely forgotten her duties. Chapter 6108. The Saint of Light was not only the faith of the light attribute cultivators, she was also an existence that cultivators of other attributes revered. However, the Saint of Light had abandoned herself to such an extent that she had stubbornly insisted on being involved with the darkness attribute. She had even done such a thing for Di Beichen. At that moment, the crowd felt that their previous respect for Bailey Hongzhuang had been wasted. It was simply a waste of their love and respect. Xiao Yanlong and Junhong Qing looked at each other. The corners of their lips could not help but curl into a smile. At the same time, they gestured for their own cultivators to raise wave after wave of voices. If Di Beichen were to fall from power today, Bailey Hongzhuang would definitely be implicated as well. Once Bailey Hongzhuang loses her status as the Saint of Light, Xiao So would have hope once again. This way, everything would return to square one. The Di family would decline and they would take the opportunity to rise. Faced with the crowd's curses, Di Beichen frowned slightly and reached out his hand to protect Bailey Hongzhuang behind him. Bailey Hongzhuang suddenly spoke up. I know that everyone is very dissatisfied with my status. To be honest, I have resigned from my position as the Saint of Light. This was her decision. Even if the president did not agree to it at the time, she did not want her actions to affect the president and the Holy Light Assembly. The crowd, who had been clamoring, was stunned when they heard this. The lively scene suddenly fell silent and the atmosphere was exceptionally strange. The crowd looked at each other. Did they hear wrongly? Bailey Hongzhuang said that she had resigned from her position as the Saint of Light? She must be crazy. For the sake of Di Beichen, she would even give up her status? Di Yujue's hands trembled slightly. Lin Yunqing could not help but cover her mouth. Her eyes were vaguely moist. They were well aware of the relationship between Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichen. They were surprised when they found out that Bailey Hongzhuang supported Beichen unconditionally, but they never thought that Bailey Hongzhuang would make such a sacrifice. How many people yearned for that position? However, she said it so calmly, as if it was a small matter not worth mentioning. For so many days, Bailey Hongzhuang had never mentioned it in front of them. Lin Yunqing suddenly felt a bit of heartache. This girl had really done too much for her son. Fortunately, she also understood that Beichen would definitely not let her down. Feng Yuxian and the others turned to look at Lu Hongwei. They had not heard Lu Hongwei mention this before. Lu Hongwei did not answer Feng Yuxian and the others' questions. In fact, he did not agree. Even if Bailey Hongzhuang chose to stand on Di Beichen's side, the Saint of Light was chosen by the Saint Crystal. Bailey Hongzhuang was destined to be the Saint of Light. Regardless of whether she resigned or not, she was the only Saint of Light. This wasn't a position that could be taken over by anyone if one of them left. The entire Holy Light Assembly had tried for so many years, but no one had been able to gain the recognition of the Saint Crystal. Only Bailey Hongzhuang could do it. He was unwilling to give up on Bailey Hongzhuang just like that. Just as Lu Hongwei was about to deny it, Di Beichen's voice suddenly rang out. She is not the Saint of Light, but the Saint of Darkness. Chapter 6109. Dark Saintess. This was a term that had never been heard before, yet it was incomparably clear in everyone's ears. Everyone's expression froze momentarily. It was as if time had been frozen, leaving only the two black silhouettes. What did this mean? Everyone was asking the same question in their hearts. Bailey Hongzhuang was the Dark Saintess? Was this a joke? However, Chen Feng and the rest of the young cultivators that had participated in the ancient battlefield couldn't help but exchange glances as a bold and crazy conjecture appeared in their minds. Could it be that Bailey Hongzhuang was a dual attribute Dark Saintess? Not only did she possess an outstanding light attribute, but she was also a dark attribute cultivator? If that was truly the case, then the reality was too scary, right? Dark Saintess. Lei Ming frowned. What was this all about? Before coming here, he had clearly thought that everything would be settled easily. However, after coming here, everything seemed to be different. One complicated problem after another appeared without stop. Even he couldn't understand what was going on. Bailey Hongzhuang fixed her gaze on Di Beichen as a bright and beautiful smile appeared on her face. That's right. I am the Dark Saintess. She was the Dark Saintess, while Beichen was the Dark Saintess. Only with this could they be a true couple. If it wasn't for the fact that she had to deal with Xiao Sou back then, she wouldn't have competed for the position of the Light Saintess. All this time, Beichen had been bearing the criticism of these people, causing her to feel extremely uncomfortable. Rather than that, it would be better for her to live as a dark attribute cultivator. That would be more free and easy. Di Yujue and the rest that understood the situation smiled. They had already guessed the plan of Di Beichen and Feng Yuxian. Bailey Hongzhuang, whether you are the Dark Saintess or not, this is not something that can be decided with words alone. Feng Yuxian frowned. If Bailey Hongzhuang had given up the position of the Light Saintess due to feelings, she could still somewhat understand. However, she was now claiming that she was the Dark Saintess for no reason at all. This was too childish. This kind of thing was not a child's play. Just saying it casually was enough. Lu Hongwei was also a little confused. In his eyes, Bailey Hongzhuang had always been a person who knew her limit. But now, she suddenly said something like that. It was indeed a little strange. I am indeed the Saintess of Light. The corners of Bailey Hongzhuang's lips curled up. In the next moment, under everyone's gaze, she slowly stretched out her right hand. A black light slowly appeared in her hand. It was like a dancing black flame, dancing with the wind and emitting a demonic aura. Everyone stared blankly at the black light. For a moment, they couldn't even come back to their senses. If I'm not mistaken, it seems to be of the dark attribute, right? Jiang Wenyan nudged Murong Jing with his elbow. Am I seeing things? You don't seem to be seeing things. Murong Jing said in a daze. Because I seem to have seen it too. What followed after the silence was an explosive heated discussion. That smear of black was like a spark that quickly set the prairie ablaze. Everyone was shocked by the scene in front of them. They could not accept such a sudden occurrence that defied common sense. Heavens! What did I just see? Isn't Bailey Hongzhuang the light saintess? Why does she have the dark attribute? Chapter 61:10. Looking at the shocked expressions of the people below the stage, Bailey Hongzhuang watched all this with a calm expression. She turned to look at Di Beichen, who also returned a gentle gaze. All along, they had never mentioned the problem of dual attributes in front of others. They originally wanted to use it as a trump card, but they did not expect it to be made public on such an occasion. However, they were also very satisfied with such an effect. How is this possible? Lu Hongwei was also dumbfounded because he was also standing on the high platform. He could clearly feel that the dark power surging out of Bailey Hongzhuang was real and not a magic trick. He knew very well how strong Bailey Hongzhuang's light attribute talent was. He also remembered the scene when she lit up the Holy Maiden crystal. However, the figure in front of him exuding a dark aura was also real. Aren't darkness and light opposite? Why is this happening now? Luo Qinghao could not help but rub his eyes and carefully look at the scene in front of him. This was too shocking. The Holy Maiden really has the dark attribute? The hesitant voice was full of uncertainty. Even if all this really appeared in front of them, they still felt that it was inconceivable. Lei Ming and the other presidents did not speak. From the stiff lines on their faces, one could understand their complicated feelings. Xiao Yanlong could not help but look at Di Yujue. After noticing Di Yujue's calm expression, he understood that Di Yujue had already known this. Was it because of this that he had the confidence to support Di Beichen to make such a move? President Lu, do you know what's going on? Song Langtian lowered his voice and asked. This kind of thing completely subverted their understanding. Lu Hongwei shook his head, his eyes full of thoughts. Bailey Hongzhuang hadn't told him this before, so he didn't know anything about it. As a president, he had read a lot of books and thought that he had a good understanding of the light attribute, but such a scene really made him unable to explain. Among all of them, the most excited were the dark attribute cultivators. This news was also an unexpected surprise for them. The Holy Maiden of Light also possessed the dark attribute. Their initial worries had completely disappeared. It turned out that the high and mighty Saint of the Light was actually the same as them. Presidents, you said that the reason why the darkness attribute is suppressed is because this attribute is too dark and gloomy. However, I used to be the Holy Maiden of the Light, and now I also possess the dark attribute. Is that why you still insist on this? Her ink-black phoenix eyes stared at Lu Hongwei and the others. She had never believed that attributes represented a person's character. There were also many good people among the dark attribute cultivators. Moreover, she possessed both light and dark attributes at the same time. It was obvious that all of this was fake. Silence. None of the 7 guild leaders could answer Bailey Hongzhuang's question. This news directly ruined their plan. If they couldn't explain this point, even if they used force to suppress everything, they would still be criticized in the future. This simply didn't make sense. Because you are the Saint of Light, the only person who has been acknowledged by the Saint Crystal in all these years. That is why you are an exception. After a long while, Lu Hongwei slowly spoke. Chapter 61:11. That's right, you might be an exception. Luo Qinghao nodded. The Saint of the Light who had only appeared after so many years must have something special about her. Previously, he had not understood why Bailey Hongzhuang had been chosen. Now, he understood a little better. Perhaps this was the most special thing about her. When the crowd heard Lu Hongwei's explanation, they looked at Bailey Hongzhuang once again with a sense of reverence in their eyes. She was indeed the Saint of the Light whom they had been searching for so long. It turns out that she has such a special thing about her. Xiao Yanlong's heart sank. He had thought that by removing Bailey Hongzhuang from her position, Xiao So would have a chance. However, when Bailey Hongzhuang had displayed her dual attributes, he realized that the crowd did not feel anything. On the contrary, there seemed to be a sense of admiration in their eyes. Indeed, it was hard not to gasp in amazement at the appearance of the first dual attribute cultivator in such a long time. Dual attributes meant that she possessed dual powers. Most importantly, these two powers were publicly acknowledged as the most powerful. Both of them had appeared in her body at the same time. If this was not a sign of extraordinary talent, then what was? Bailey Hongzhuang smiled faintly when she heard this answer. She then turned towards Di Baichen. Baichen, it's time for you to perform. Di Baichen raised the corners of his lips and replied, since that's the case, presidents, you'd better watch carefully. Hearing Di Baichen's words, the hearts of the 7 presidents quivered. Even though they did not know what Di Baichen was preparing next, they understood that it was not going to be anything good just by listening to his words. At the next moment, Di Baichen's body suddenly released a dazzling white light. The light was filled with a mysterious and holy aura. It carried with it an incomparably pure and clear power, causing the initially nervous hearts of the crowd to calm down inexplicably. However, this scene once again shocked everyone. Because wasn't the power that was emitting that incomparable aura the power of light? Isn't Di Baichen of the darkness attribute? Why would the power of light appear on him? Oh my God, could it be that Di Baichen's situation is the same as Bailey Hongzhuang's? He also has dual attributes? If that's really the case, then it's too terrifying. Everyone looked at each other in dismay. What had happened today had given them too much shock. One after another, each more shocking than the last. A second ago they hadn't calmed down, but the next second they fell into an even greater shock. Most importantly, if Bailey Hongzhuang was an accident, then what was Di Baichen? The answers that the 7 guild leaders had given a second ago had already been dispelled in the next second. Even those who despised the darkness attribute began to understand that one's character and attribute had nothing to do with one's character. Otherwise, the situation with Di Baichen wouldn't have happened. Lin Yi clasped her hands together tightly. Her small face was full of unconcealed excitement. This is simply too cool. It seems that second cousin and second cousin-in-law are really a perfect match. Lin Qianqian also nodded. They are really a match made in heaven. Even this kind of thing can happen to them. I really can't find any other explanation other than fate. Not only Lin Yi and Lin Qianqian, but everyone present at the moment also understood. Chapter 61:12. Looking at Di Baichen's display of light energy, Lu Hongwei stood there in a daze, as if he had been struck by a heavy blow. With his experience, how could he not understand that Di Baichen's talent in the light attribute was equally astonishing? With such talent, even if it couldn't be compared to Bailey Hongzhuang, it was definitely an extraordinary existence in the Radiant Sacred Assembly. If Di Baichen was in the Radiant Sacred Assembly, there was no doubt that he would be heavily nurtured. However, such astonishing talent actually appeared in the body of a dark attribute cultivator. He never knew that Di Baichen had such talent. The 7 presidents were silent. They found it hard to believe that such a thing could happen. Most importantly, in today's environment where young people were fighting for the limelight, ordinary people with such talent would have long been unable to restrain themselves from showing off. However, Di Baichen and Bailey Hongzhuang were actually able to endure and not say anything. This didn't conform to common sense at all. This kind of talent, coupled with Di Baichen's heavenly mandate constitution and Bailey Hongzhuang's multiple identities and means, even they had to admit that among the young cultivators in the entire upper realm, they were extremely powerful existences. Most importantly, this kind of mentality was even more terrifying. The 7 presidents didn't know what to say at this moment because they were worried that if they said another point, they would be refuted. After all, the speed at which they were slapped in the face just now was too fast. Jun Hongqing couldn't help but look at Di Yujue with a trace of envy. Having such a son and daughter-in-law was indeed something to be proud of. Originally, He didn't understand why Di Baichen and Bailey Hongzhuang's performance was extremely outstanding every time they went out for experience. Now, he finally understood. With this kind of talent, coupled with their own abilities, ordinary people were indeed no match for them. He really didn't know where Di Yujue's good luck came from. He clearly didn't have any training, but he had already grown to be so outstanding. You also have dual attributes? Lei Ming frowned as he looked at Di Baichen, his voice full of uncertainty. If Bailey Hongzhuang's identity was special, and she might have some talents that others didn't have, then why was Di Baichen in the same situation? For so many years, there had never been a cultivator with dual attributes in the upper realm. Now, not only had they suddenly appeared, but there were also two of them. Most importantly, they were a couple. Could there really be such a coincidence in this world? That's right. Di Baichen nodded. When I first awakened, I had dual attributes. After saying so, Di Baichen turned to look at Lu Hongwei and the others. Guild leaders, under such circumstances, you should be able to believe that awakening the darkness attribute doesn't mean that one's heart is dark, right? Lu Hongwei and the others looked at each other, but no one answered. This was something they had always believed in. If they agreed, then they would have no reason to stop the establishment of the Dark Sacred Assembly. No one was surprised by the silence of the 7 guild leaders. This news came too suddenly. If he didn't have some time to think about it, it would be impossible to give an answer. Most importantly, looking at Di Baichen and Bailey Hongzhuang standing together, a thought involuntarily emerged in everyone's mind. Perhaps the appearance of the two of them was a turning point for the darkness attribute cultivators. Just as the time had not come yet, the darkness attribute had been suppressed in the past. However, when that opportunity appeared, all of this might change. Bailey Hongzhuang and Bailey Hongzhuang might be that opportunity. Chapter 61:13. Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Baichen looked at the shocked 7 guild leaders, and no one urged them. In fact, everything was as they had expected. Once the dual attribute talent was displayed, it would inevitably cause an extremely sensational effect. Perhaps the reason why they awakened these two attributes was that their master wanted to help them, making their path smoother. Lu Hongwei was silent for a long time before he said, "Why don't we put this matter aside for the time being and discuss it first?" There were too many unforeseen events now. If they didn't take some time to carefully consider it, acting rashly might be even worse. I agree. Song Langtian nodded. Originally, because of his relationship with Bailey Hongzhuang, he didn't want to intervene too much in the establishment of the Dark Sacred Assembly. Now that such a thing had happened, if they couldn't give everyone an explanation, it would only affect the image of the 7 major guilds. Listening to Lu Hongwei and Song Langtian's words, Luo Qinghao and the other 4's faces became more and more gloomy. If they stopped all this now, it would mean sending a message to everyone that they needed to discuss whether to let the Dark Sacred Assembly be established. However, their purpose here was to stop all this. No, this will affect the dignity of our 7 major guilds, Luo Qinghao said. Yan Yi agreed. Whether Di Baichen and Song Langtian have dual attributes or not, our decision won't change, so don't hesitate now. Just stop it. Although these 2 young people are young, their methods are not simple. We don't need to listen to what they say. With the power of our 7 major guilds, can't we stop them? Thunder's face was the most ugly. Di Baichen had previously contradicted them many times. If this matter was temporarily put aside today, how could he get out of the embarrassing situation? But this matter really needs to be discussed, Lu Hongwei said in a deep voice. No need. Thunder's voice turned cold. President Lu, because Bailey Hongzhuang is the Holy Maiden of Light, you have been shielding her in every possible way. Now you even have such thoughts. Isn't it too much? In his opinion, Lu Hongwei and Song Langtian seemed to have been bribed by Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Baichen. Since they came here, The two of them had not done anything and even tried to speak up for Bailey Hongzhuang and Song Langtian. It was really hateful. I've never protected anyone, Lu Hongwei said with a straight face. President Lei, I hope that you won't mix your personal feelings into this matter. Everything I've done is for the sake of the Sacred Assembly. Now that so many changes have occurred, if I persist, the consequences may not be good. As the president of the Radiant Sacred Assembly, Lu Hongwei's prestige was undeniable. Originally, he did not say anything because he had not made up his mind. However, now that Lei Ming had been provoked and was acting more and more recklessly, he could not allow the latter to continue like this. Lei Ming's expression froze as his heart trembled. Facing Lu Hongwei's pair of fierce eyes, he finally regained his senses. Among the 7 presidents, his position was second only to Lu Hongwei, but once Lu Hongwei was angry, he still had to be cautious. Even though no one knew what the 7 presidents were talking about, they could roughly guess what was going on from their expressions. Obviously, there had been a disagreement among the 7 presidents on this matter. Chapter 61:14. Yujue, it seems that dual attributes really do have quite a bit of influence. A trace of a smile appeared on Di Linxuan's face. As the former head of the Di family, he was a shrewd person. Even before Di Beichen and Yu Yujue had displayed their talents, he had already noticed that President Lu and President Song seemed to have a lot of concerns about this matter. Otherwise, with President Lu's status, he would definitely be the one to represent this matter. Originally, because none of the 7 presidents had come forward, they had already subconsciously thought that none of them would be able to change their minds. Now that 2 of the presidents didn't show any signs of opposition, this was already a pleasant surprise to them. If they couldn't come to a conclusion for the time being, they would have a much higher chance of success. Di Yujue's lips curled into a faint smile. Beichen and Hongzhuang really are a match made in heaven. Apart from the 2 of them, I'm afraid that no one else can do this. Even if they were stronger than Beichen and Yu Yujue, he was certain that no one else would be able to do this better than the 2 of them. I feel that this seemingly impossible matter actually has a trace of hope. Lin Wenlan's voice relaxed a bit. Even she felt that this scene was inconceivable. This situation was as if everyone was certain that this was a dead end. Some people wouldn't turn back until they hit a wall, but it seemed like they were about to succeed. Lin Yunqing clenched her hands into fists as she constantly prayed in her heart, hoping that Beichen and Yu Yujue would succeed. As parents, their strength was simply too insignificant in front of the 7 presidents. At this moment, all they could do was pray. After a while, Lu Hongwei's voice rang out. Everyone, today's matter has happened too suddenly. I feel that we need some time to discuss this matter. Once these words were spoken, an uproar broke out. Shocked gazes fell on the 7 presidents, or on Bailey Hongzhuang and Bailey Hongzhuang's bodies. On one hand, everyone was shocked by the 7 presidents' decision. On the other hand, the young cultivators were shocked by Bailey Hongzhuang and Yu Yujue's success. This was simply too shocking. In their opinion, this was a simple and violent matter. However, after Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichen's glib tongue, they were actually able to persuade the 7 presidents? It can't be? Do we still need to discuss this matter? Nangong Yuqing was completely dumbfounded. He stretched out his hand and pinched his arm. When he felt the pain, he was sure that everything in front of him was real. What do you want to discuss? Xiao Sudong's lips twitched. Wasn't this 2F** king fake? Didn't the upper realm forbid the establishment of the dark sanctum? But now, because Bailey Hongzhuang and Lin Yiqian had dual attributes, this idea had changed? Tomorrow we will give everyone a definite answer. Lu Hongwei didn't care about the discussion below the stage and made a decision that couldn't be refused. Although Lei Ming and the others were dissatisfied, they could only swallow their dissatisfaction in front of the president of the Radiant Sacred Assembly. At the same time, they also made up their minds to talk to President Tong Lu today. If the Dark Sanctum was really established, then the 7 major guilds would really become a joke. Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichen both breathed a sigh of relief and revealed happy smiles on their faces. Chapter 61:15. At least, as far as the current situation was concerned, they had the upper hand. Huang Fu-Ting and the other dark attribute cultivators also showed comfortable smiles on their faces. Looking at the 2 young figures on the high platform, everyone admired them even more. Their president and his wife were really amazing people. They were almost ready to risk their lives today, but they didn't expect their president and his wife to turn the tide and forcibly stop such a scene. Huang Fu, does this mean that the 7 presidents may allow the establishment of the Dark Sacred Assembly? Qin Wan couldn't hide her joy. Once the Dark Sacred Assembly was established, everyone would have no reason to reject the Dark Attribute cultivators. In this way, Huang Fu-Ting didn't need to bear such heavy shackles anymore. Huang Fu-Ting muttered, "Now things are indeed developing in a good direction, but before it's confirmed, no one can be sure of the result. In my opinion, among the 7 presidents, I'm afraid that only President Liu and President Song have changed their mind." Qin Wan-er's smile froze and her brows furrowed. Then, is the possibility of success relatively small? That's not necessarily the case. Huang Fu-Ting smiled faintly. Among the 7 presidents, President Liu is the leader. As long as we can persuade President Liu, this matter will have a great turn for the better. I still believe in the young master and his wife's ability. Now, he really had no choice but to accept the young master's ability. Today's scenes made people gasp in amazement. Lu Hongwei ignored the dissatisfaction of Lei Ming and the others, and turned to Di Beichen and said, "You two come here, I want to talk to you." Yes. Even if they were not on the same side now, Bailey Hongzhuang and Lu Hongwei had always been very respectful to Lu Hongwei. What's more, they seemed to see hope in President Liu. As Lu Hongwei and the others left with Bailey Hongzhuang and Lu Hongwei, the people around the square knew that there would be no good show to watch today, so they all dispersed. I wonder what the result will be tomorrow. Thinking about it, I'm really looking forward to it. If the upper realm really has another Dark Sacred Assembly, then it will be really interesting. Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichen will also become famous. No matter what, today's events have opened our eyes. If I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I wouldn't have believed it. Everyone discussed as they left. Just based on what they had seen today, this trip had not been in vain. As for tomorrow, it would probably be even more exciting than today. Damn it, how did the situation become like this? Xiao Yanlong frowned. At the beginning, the situation was extremely advantageous to them, but for some reason, the situation had changed. Now, he felt a strong sense of crisis. If things continued to develop like this, the situation might become more and more unfavorable for them. This Bailey Hongzhuang really has some tricks up her sleeve. Even President Liu was bribed by her. Junhong Qing gritted his teeth. He knew that there was something strange about these 2 little guys. So, he had already prepared a trump card. What should we do now? Even someone as calm as Xiao Yanlong couldn't help but panic at this moment. Once the Dark Sacred Assembly was established, the Di family would have a transcendent status. At that time, they wouldn't even have the right to negotiate. Chapter 61:16. The headquarters of the Dark Sacred Assembly. After Lu Hongwei said that he had something to discuss, Bailey Hongzhuang brought President Liu and other presidents to the headquarters of the Dark Sacred Assembly. "President Liu, you can rest here tonight," Bailey Hongzhuang said with a light smile. Before Lu Hongwei spoke, Lei Ming said, "It's not appropriate for us to live here. Let's find a place to stay in the Emperor Cloud City." Seeing this, Bailey Hongzhuang no longer said anything. This Lei Ming was obviously not on the same side as them. No matter what they do, the other party will not appreciate it, so there was no need to please him. "President Liu, since you have something to talk about, you can stay here. I have nothing to ask, so I'll take my leave first." Lei Ming's face was livid. Since Lu Hongwei made the plan to suspend, his face has not looked good. As soon as his voice fell, Lei Ming turned and left directly. Lu Hongwei glanced at his back faintly and then retracted his gaze. Lei Ming had always been like this, so it was not surprising that he would do such a thing. He just had some things to ask Bailey Hongzhuang. If Lei Ming stayed here, it would be more troublesome. Instead of that, it was better to let him leave and avoid trouble. As Lei Ming left, Luo Qinghao and others looked at each other and followed him. In addition to Lu Hongwei, the only one left was Song Langtian. Hongzhuang, when did you awaken the dual attributes? When we first awakened our talents, we awakened the dual attributes, but at first, the two of us didn't know what was going on. At that time, the person in charge of the awakening said that there were certain impurities in our talent. Later, after our research, we understood that it was not an impurity, but another attribute. Facing Lu Hongwei, Bailey Hongzhuang also told the truth. Now that they recalled the situation at that time, they also felt it was very interesting. So that's how it is. Lu Hongwei understood and said, "Can you show it to me again?" "No problem." When Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichen once again displayed the two attributes, Lu Hongwei and Song Langtian couldn't help but marvel. At this moment, when they calmed down and looked carefully, they increasingly felt the power of the dual attribute. You might have opened up a whole new world. A smile appeared on Lu Hongwei's face. From now on, there would be another possibility in the entire upper realm, and that was that the awakening of a cultivator's innate talent would not be limited to just one type of innate talent. It was possible that two or even more attributes would be awakened. President Lu, regarding the establishment of the Dark Sacred Assembly, we've already discussed many things before. Bailey Hongzhuang's eyes were serious. Darkness is just an attribute. It has nothing to do with the cultivator's personality. It would be too presumptuous of you to reject all dark attribute cultivators just because of this conjecture. Over the past few days, as more and more darkness-type cultivators have come here, our understanding has also increased. It had not been easy for them all these years. President, although not allowing the establishment of the Dark Sacred Assembly is a rule passed down for so many years, I don't think the rule can't be broken, just like the dual attribute. This has never happened before, but it still happened now, didn't it? Chapter 61:17. Looking at Bailey Hongzhuang's anxious and nervous look, President Lu couldn't help but chuckle. "It's rare to see you so nervous. Sure enough, only Di Beichen's affairs can make you so concerned." Hearing this, Di Beichen turned his eyes full of affection. Bailey Hongzhuang blushed slightly and stubbornly said, "I'm fighting for a future for countless dark attribute cultivators." Lu Hongwei put away his joking expression and looked at Song Langtian. "President Song, what do you think about this matter?" "In fact, I have never been too insistent on this point. Over the years, dark attribute cultivators have indeed had a hard time. Attribute issues and character cannot be linked. What happened hundreds of years ago does not mean that it will happen hundreds of years later. In fact, if there is really a genius who wants to rule the entire upper realm, it is possible no matter what attribute." Song Langtian slowly expressed his thoughts. He could only say this in front of President Lu. If he said it in front of Lei Ming and the others, it would inevitably cause a dispute. This matter has been going on for so many years, it is indeed time to seek a change. Lu Hongwei nodded. On the other side, Lei Ming and the others found a place to stay in the Emperor Cloud City. Although the inns in the Emperor Cloud City were already full, it was still easy for the five of them to find a place to stay. As soon as they entered the room, Lei Ming couldn't help but say angrily, "I haven't seen you for a while. I didn't expect President Lu to have changed so much." Indeed, President Lu's performance today really disappointed us. Yan Yi nodded, his face full of disappointment. Luo Qinghao sighed. "I don't know what kind of magic potion this Bailey Hongzhuang gave President Lu to make him so protective of her. If this kind of thing was in the past, there would be no discussion at all. In my opinion, President Liu and President Song will most likely agree with their approach after talking with them today. I don't understand if President Liu is getting old or something. He is getting more and more confused when doing things. If President Liu is allowed to make the decision, then it's really over. Lei Ming slammed the table. The anger on his face was obvious. Di Baichen was already so arrogant today. If the dark sacred assembly was established, he wouldn't care about anyone in the future. Most importantly, how was he supposed to face others in this way? Just based on this point alone, he could not let Di Baichen succeed. I can understand why Guild Leader Song is doing this, Feng Yuxian slowly said. I heard that Bailey Hongzhuang cured Song Longtian's hidden disease a while ago. Just because of this kindness, he can't do anything to Bailey Hongzhuang. There's actually such a thing? Yan Yi was astonished and immediately understood. This is indeed understandable. What do you all think? Thunder looked at the four guild leaders. I think we must persevere. I agree. Luo Qinghao said without hesitation. Darkness attribute cultivators are so dangerous. We can't let them develop. Today, he really felt that the momentum of those guys was simply terrifying. With Di Baichen and Feng Yuxian leading them, those guys would probably become stronger soon. Chapter 61:18. It seems that all of us have the same idea. Lei Ming looked at everyone's reaction with a satisfied look on his face. Fortunately, not everyone was as muddle-headed as President Liu. At least they were still clear-headed. The upper realm had been like this for so many years, living very peacefully. They didn't need to take risks to accept other things at all. Xiao Yanlong and Jun Hongqing had also been thinking of a way. Based on today's situation, if they didn't quickly find a way to stabilize the situation, then Di Baichen might really succeed. After knowing that only Lu Hongwei and Song Langtian were in the Dark Sacred Assembly, Lei Ming and the other presidents had left, they had a better understanding of the situation. President Liu and President Song must support Di Baichen, so we must let the other 5 presidents make up their minds. Jun Hongqing said in a deep voice. Xiao Yanlong frowned slightly, his face full of worry. Even if these 5 presidents are firm, President Liu has always been the leader of the 7 presidents. As long as he agrees to this, it will be very difficult for the others to stop it. Not to mention anything else, it could be seen from President Liu's performance on the stage today. What was the use of President Lei and the others objecting? President Liu had stabilized the whole situation with just one sentence, and there was no room for argument at all. Don't be so pessimistic, there will always be a way. Jun Hongqing looked certain. Think about it carefully, President Liu helping Bailey Hongzhuang, many people will think that he is biased. No matter how high President Liu's status is, he can't withstand everyone's opposition. As long as we can incite everyone's opposition at the right time, then there is still room for negotiation. Isn't the reason why today's situation has become like this because Di Baichen and the others have grasped everyone's emotions? Xiao Yanlong nodded. What you said makes sense. Di Baichen and the others' words today are indeed preconceived, causing everyone's thoughts to change. Moreover, such a pitiful act makes it impossible for people to refute. Just like today, President Lei only said a cruel fact. It was not so difficult to understand in normal times, but in today's environment, everyone inevitably felt that he was cold and cruel. I have some friendship with President Lei. No matter what, let's give it a try first. Jun Hongqing's solemn face brightened up a little. He knew Lei Ming's character. Di Baichen had offended him so much today. No matter what, Lei Ming would never forgive him. All right. After convincing Lu Hongwei and Song Langtian, Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Baichen both breathed a sigh of relief and smiled happily. Since you've understood, I'll go back first. Lu Hongwei stood up. I need to go back and tell them about this. I'll announce it to everyone tomorrow. Thank you, President. Bailey Hongzhuang said with a smile. With President Lu's reputation, as long as he agreed, there wouldn't be any problems. Even if the other 5 presidents still objected, as long as President Lu agreed tomorrow, things would still be much easier to solve. Looking at Bailey Hongzhuang and Song Longtian's happy appearance, Lu Hongwei also smiled faintly. You two young people are really not ordinary people. You even dare to do such a thing. You are destined to succeed. Chapter 61:19. When she had first mentioned this to the president, she had felt that the president's heart had wavered. However, she had also understood that it would not be easy to make such a decision. However, she had never thought that the president would actually agree with their approach. This kind of support was simply too important to them. As the 2 presidents left, Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichen finally let out a sigh of relief. The 2 of them looked at each other and smiled. The corners of their lips could not help but curl upwards. It seems that this matter has progressed more smoothly than we had imagined. Bailey Hongzhuang smiled. Today, first, Ouyang Jifeng had expressed his support. Now, even the 2 presidents had agreed with their approach. Even if the matter had not been declared a success, it was already halfway to success. This is all thanks to my wife. Di Beichen chuckled. If my wife had not convinced the 2 presidents, this matter would not have progressed so smoothly. No, it's because of you. Bailey Hongzhuang's eyes grew brighter. Many things seemed to be very difficult, but when one really tried to do it, the sense of accomplishment was incomparable to anything else. They had done such a crazy thing. Even in the face of such great pressure, their original intentions had not changed. Now that they were about to succeed, this kind of joy could not be expressed in words. I think I should make a trip back to the family so that my father and the others don't have to worry so much. Di Beichen smiled as he looked outside the room. He knew that his family had always supported his every decision, but he also wanted to protect his family. These days, he had clearly sensed the pressure that the Lin and Di family were shouldering. This made his heart very heavy. He thought that if he brought this good news back today, everyone would be able to feel more at ease. Bailey Hongzhuang nodded slightly. Then you should make a trip back so that everyone can feel more at ease. However, before the dust has settled, we cannot let down our guard. That President Luo and President Lei have been targeting us. They must not be easy to deal with. Hearing this, Di Beichen narrowed his long and beautiful eyes. A faint light flashed across them. He also had a deep impression of these 2 presidents. Indeed, although President Lu had already agreed with their approach, it wasn't easy to convince Lei Ming and the others. This matter was troublesome to deal with after all. At the same time, the entire Emperor Cloud City was discussing this matter. Everyone was curious about the results that would be announced tomorrow. Various guesses kept spreading, but most people still believed that it was impossible for the Dark Sacred Assembly to be established, because that was something that they had always resisted. Although Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichen both have the darkness attribute, I feel that this is because they are an exception. After being bullied for so many years, the darkness attribute cultivators must hate us to the core. If we let them rise again now, their hatred for us will completely erupt. Wouldn't that be troublesome? You're right. That's the most dangerous part. Xiao Sudong and Nangong Yuqing listened to everyone's discussion and finally felt relieved. I told you that no one would support it. It's just that today's situation was too sudden and everyone couldn't react in time. It won't be like this tomorrow. Xiao Sudong heaved a sigh of relief and said. Chapter 61:20. Early the next morning, the cultivators of Emperor Cloud City once again gathered in the square of the Dark Sacred Assembly. Many people had stayed up all night and were curious about today's results, so they had already rushed over early in the morning. Di Yujue and the others also arrived very early. Even though Di Beichen had already told them that President Lu had agreed, they still hadn't rested that night. This was because they were looking forward to it even more. Once the Dark Sacred Assembly was successfully established, how exciting would that be? After today, everyone will be able to live peacefully. Lin Wenlan smiled faintly. For a while, everyone had been worried about this matter, and the stone in their hearts had never been lifted. Fortunately, the situation was much better than they had imagined. President Liu and President Song were directly convinced. When he heard it last night, he even wondered if he had misheard. It was really too unbelievable. Hearing Lin Wenlan's words, Di Linxian and the others smiled. I'm afraid only Beichen and Hong Zhuang can do this. While Di Yujue was looking around the square, his gaze quietly fell on Xiao Yanlong and Jun Hongqing. However, when he noticed the smiles on their faces, his heart suddenly sank. Logically speaking, once the Dark Sacred Assembly was successfully established, the most worried people would be Xiao Yanlong and Jun Hongqing. After yesterday's event, he noticed that the two of them had extremely ugly expressions. Obviously, they were worried about this matter. However, after a night, the two of them were still so calm and composed. This didn't make sense. Could it be that there were some unforeseen circumstances? Just as Di Yujue was thinking, Di Beichen and Bailey Hongzhuang appeared on the high platform together. They were also wearing the exclusive clothes of the Dark Sacred Assembly, black and red, revealing a trace of fierceness and domineering. President Liu hasn't arrived yet. Let's wait patiently for the time being. Bailey Hongzhuang's lips curled into a smile, and her voice was sweet and calm. Even if the President Liu hadn't made a decision yet, after noticing Bailey Hongzhuang's relaxed expression, everyone understood the general idea in their hearts. It can't be? Are the President Liu really going to approve the establishment of the Dark Sacred Assembly? If that's the case, then what's the point of everything I've persevered for? Who knows? Aren't these decisions made by the 7 guilds? Just based on yesterday's performance, I already feel that something is wrong. If the establishment is successful, who among the younger generation will be able to compete with the two of them? Whispers rang out one after another. Everyone was whispering to each other. Everyone had hated and despised dark attribute cultivators for many years. In their eyes, dark attribute cultivators were destined to be despised. When they thought about how dark attribute cultivators would be on equal footing with them in the future, everyone felt uncomfortable. At this moment, a series of footsteps came from the right. Hearing the sound of footsteps, everyone turned their gazes towards it. At this moment, only the guild leaders of the 7 large guilds had arrived. Bailey Hongzhuang also turned her head and looked expectantly at the appearance of the 7 guild leaders. But with one look, her brows furrowed. Because the person in the lead wasn't President Liu, but Lei Ming. As the few guild leaders gradually approached, Bailey Hongzhuang also saw the situation clearly, and her heart sank. Chapter 61-21. Di Beichen's eyes instantly turned gloomy. Even if he didn't know what had happened, he was sure that the situation in front of him was absolutely abnormal. President Liu and President Song had made up their minds yesterday to go back and persuade the other presidents. However, now that all the other presidents had appeared except for these two, there must be something fishy going on. Even if the two presidents were not convinced, or were convinced, they could still come together today. Given the current situation, there was only one possibility. Something had happened to the two presidents. Damn it! Below the high platform, Ziren couldn't help but curse, his eyes full of anger. These guys are really bold. They actually dared to attack President Liu. What should we do now? Shangguan Yingying also panicked. They had the advantage, but President Liu and the others didn't come. Needless to say, President Lei and the others were definitely up to no good. The expressions of Di Yujue and the others suddenly changed. They already knew the outcome of today's event. No wonder Xiao Yanlong and the others were so calm. It turns out that they already knew all of this. Di Yujue's voice was ice-cold, without the slightest bit of warmth. A vicious light flashed in his eyes. He had really underestimated these two fellows. They actually dared to use such methods in the Imperial Cloud City. I didn't expect Lei Ming and the others to be so bold. They even dared to do such a thing on such an occasion. Lin Wunlan gradually folded her hands, her face full of anger. President Lei and the others definitely won't support the establishment of the Dark Sacred Assembly. Isn't the situation now terrible? Lin Yunqing looked nervous. Victory was already in sight, but she didn't expect such a thing to happen. The most important thing was that this scene happened so suddenly that they didn't have time to find the two presidents. Diu Jue turned sideways and immediately ordered the elders to take people to the Emperor Cloud City to find the two presidents. According to his judgment, Lei Ming and the others didn't have the guts to kill President Liu and the others. The reason for the current situation was that the two presidents had been drugged or locked somewhere. As long as they could find the two presidents quickly, there might be a chance for them to turn things around. Di Beichen and Bailey Hongzhuang looked at each other and saw the heaviness in each other's eyes. It seems that President Liu and President Song were ambushed after they returned last night, Bailey Hongzhuang said in a deep voice. I've overlooked this point. Di Beichen clenched his fists under his sleeves, his eyes filled with anger and guilt. This matter was so important to the entire Dark Sacred Assembly. He should have been more careful last night. Initially, he thought that with President Liu's status, no one would dare to make a move against him. But now, it seemed that he had been too naive. The so-called President Lei actually used such underhanded methods so casually. Bailey Hongzhuang held Di Beichen's hand and shook her head. It's not your fault. She understood Di Beichen's annoyance and self-blame. Because once they failed, it meant that so many dark attribute cultivators would lose their homes and hope. However, this wasn't Di Beichen's responsibility alone. She couldn't bear to see him shoulder all the responsibility. At the same time, Ouyang Jifeng's voice rang in their ears. I'll immediately send people to find them. You two try to stall for time. Chapter 61-22. Very quickly, Lei Ming and the rest appeared on the high platform. All five of them had faint smiles on their faces. When they brushed past Di Beichen, Lei Ming's voice quietly rang out, You're destined to be disappointed today. Di Beichen narrowed his eyes and a fierce look flashed across his eyes. This despicable and shameless fellow. No matter what the result was, Lei Ming was an enemy that he had to kill with his own hands. President Lei, may I know where President Liu and President Song went? Di Beichen adjusted his expression and pretended to be puzzled as he asked. Lei Ming's face was apologetic. I'm really sorry about this. President Liu and President Song probably ate something dirty last night and are not feeling well. They won't be able to come today. Since that's the case, why don't you let me meet the two presidents? Bailey Hongzhuang raised her eyebrows, her eyes filled with ridicule. As expected of the president of the Thunder Attribute Guild, he could lie without blushing. Most importantly, almost everyone present knew that Lei Ming was lying, but he could still say it with a straight face. It was as if he himself believed that the lie was the truth. There's no need. Lei Ming waved his hand. I know that Miss Bailey is a doctor, but we've already asked a doctor to treat the two presidents last night. They only need to rest for a day and they'll recover tomorrow. Below the stage, looking at the drama unfolding on the stage, with everyone's intelligence, how could they not understand the situation? It seems that President Liu and President Song chose to support the establishment of the Dark Sacred Assembly, so President Lei and the others thought of a way to prevent them from coming. You can tell just by looking at the changes in the Di family's expressions. Then President Lei and the others really have guts. They actually dared to do this. Won't President Liu and the others be angered to death when they wake up? So what if President Liu and the others are angry? Since they can't come today, the dust has already settled. No matter how dissatisfied they are, they can't change the situation. Everyone sighed and felt that Di Beichen and Bailey Hongzhuang were really unlucky. They were originally just one step away from success, but such an unforeseen event suddenly occurred. This ending was destined to be unchangeable. However, no one had any objections to this outcome. This was how the upper realm had lived for so many years. Everyone's view of darkness attribute cultivators was deeply ingrained. They were unwilling to change anything. Although President Lei and the others' actions were indeed a little extreme, they didn't think it was a bad thing. In any case, this result was enough for them. Now, let me announce the final result of our discussion. A confident and complacent smile appeared on Lei Ming's face. When his gaze landed on Xiao Yanlong and Xiao Yan, there was an additional trace of tacit understanding. In his opinion, today's plan couldn't be more perfect. Wait! Di Beichen suddenly spoke, interrupting Lei Ming's words. Lei Ming frowned and coldly stared at Di Beichen. His eyes were filled with endless majesty and intimidation. Di Beichen, how dare you interrupt my announcement? For such an important matter, I think it's more appropriate for all the guild leaders to be present. Since the 2 guild leaders aren't here, why don't we postpone this matter for another day? It won't be too late to announce it after the 2 guild leaders have recovered. Chapter 61-23. This matter was related to the future of all dark attribute cultivators. He would never allow such a thing to happen. It would be fine if the 7 presidents didn't agree, but the situation had clearly taken a turn for the better. How could he allow others to use tricks to deceive them? Absolutely not. As Di Beichen's voice fell, Luo Qinghao reprimanded him with an ashen face. Di Beichen, you are too disrespectful. Everyone present was a busy person. Because of this matter, they had already been delayed for 2 days. You have time to wait, but do you think everyone here has time to wait with you? It's such an important matter. What's the harm in delaying some time? Di Beichen wouldn't be scared out of his wits by Luo Qinghao's reprimand. This kind of reprimanding was simply a manifestation of a guilty conscience. He didn't care what the presidents in front of him thought of him. Anyway, the enmity between the 2 sides had long been formed. All he cared about was his family and the dark sacred assembly. Di Beichen, you are really bold. Are you doubting us by saying such words? Lei Ming's lips curled into a cold smile. Since yesterday, you have been impolite, self-righteous, and lawless. Is this the temperament of the young master of the Di family? That's right. I've always heard that the young master of the Di family is a genius. Now it seems that he is just arrogant and willful. Feng Yuxian also spoke. She didn't deny Di Beichen's talent in cultivation, but judging from his performance in the past 2 days, she really didn't have a good impression of him. In fact, it was already disgraceful to be able to do such a thing that was universally condemned. Di Beichen sneered. His unparalleled face curved into an evil and playful smile. His eyes, which were as bright as stars, were covered with a layer of dark clouds, inexplicably adding a trace of charming evil aura. Arrogant and willful? Di Beichen's eyes gradually turned cold. This attitude towards people like you is already not bad. You! Feng Yuxian's face flushed red. Di Beichen was clearly mocking them. What did you do to the 2 guild leaders? Di Beichen's voice was as hard and powerful as steel. He threw away his previous pretense and didn't try to hide anything anymore. What can we do? Lei Ming didn't get angry. Instead, he laughed. Young people were young people. They couldn't solve this kind of problem, so they could only use this kind of method. However, no matter how angry Di Beichen was, it was useless because he was destined to fail. As everyone knows, the relationship between us presidents is extremely good. How could there be a conflict because of something that has already been decided? Lei Ming raised his hand. Ask everyone below the stage. Do you think they would believe such a thing? Bailey Hongzhuang's anger continued to rise as she looked at the contorted face. Sure enough, there were many people in high positions who pretended to be sanctimonious. This kind of guy really made people want to punch him. No one below the stage said anything. They only needed to watch the show. In fact, everyone's heart was as clear as a mirror. The older the ginger, the spicier it was. When it came to trickery, Di Baichen and Feng Yuxian were no match for Lei Ming and the others. Huang Fu Ting and the others looked at the despicable Lei Ming and the others, and anger continued to rise in their hearts. Chapter 61-24. Now I declare. Lei Ming raised his voice and his loud voice reverberated from the center of the plaza. The dark sacred assembly cannot be established. As soon as these words were spoken, cheers rang out. Xiao Sudong and the others all had excited expressions on their faces. They had been worried for an entire night. Although there were many twists and turns in the process, the result was exactly what they had expected. Di Baichen and the others had failed. This allowed them to regain a trace of confidence. The confidence that had been crushed by Di Baichen and the others over the past few days was slowly recovering. This was because Di Baichen and the others would also fail, and they were not the only ones. And now, Di Baichen would definitely pay the price for everything that he had done. Hundreds of years ago, the 7 major guilds had always agreed to resist the dark attribute. Even after so many years, this point will not change. Even after hundreds of years, this situation will still not change. Therefore, I hope that no one will mention this topic in the future. That will definitely be rejected. Under the cheers of the crowd, Lei Ming solemnly and seriously said these words. However, his gaze quietly fell on Di Baichen. Obviously, his words were more directed at Di Baichen. Di Baichen and Bailey Hongzhuang's expressions became extremely ugly. President Liu was not present, and with their influence as juniors, they were indeed not a match for Lei Ming and the others. However, they were unwilling to accept this result. Below the high platform, Di Yujue and the others were also ashen. However, facing this result, they felt a deep sense of powerlessness. Lei Ming had already announced this result. Unless President Liu immediately appeared to refute all of this, it would be too difficult for them to change everything. Still haven't found President Liu and the others' whereabouts? Di Linshuan's expression was gloomy. From his tightly knitted brows, one could see his anxiety. Di Baichen had prepared for so long. It was really a pity that all of his efforts had gone to waste like this. Most importantly, this was Baichen's master's last wish. With Baichen's character, he would definitely not give up so easily. If he failed this time, it would be even more difficult for him to make a comeback in the future. Di Yujue shook his head slightly. Xiao Yanlong and Jun Hongqing must be involved in this matter. These 2 old foxes have many tricks up their sleeve. It's really difficult to find President Liu and President Song's whereabouts in a short period of time. Di Linxian sighed. In the end, we were still one step short. Huang Fu Ting and the other dark attribute cultivators were extremely upset. After so many years, they had finally seen a glimmer of hope. They had clearly been very close to success, but the other party's despicable method. Ever since they had awakened the darkness attribute, they had been living in such an environment. No matter how despicable and dirty the other party's methods were, it seemed that when they were targeted, everything became natural. Why did? Damn it! President Lei is really too shameless. Even someone as mature and steady as Huang Fu Ting could not help but curse at this moment. Qin Wan Er's face was filled with anxiety. We've already sent our men out. However, it's impossible to find them in a short period of time. Chapter 61-25. After the results were announced, Lei Ming and the others revealed a satisfied expression. Everything had been settled. Even if President Liu and the others woke up tomorrow and were furious, everything would be meaningless. Compared to the stability of the entire upper realm, they felt that everything was worth it. The dark sacred assembly must be destroyed, Luo Qinghao said solemnly. His voice was sonorous and powerful, carrying with it an absolute majesty. That's right, it must be destroyed. Xiao Yanlong stood up and immediately agreed. I support it too. Jun Hongqing also stood up and quietly turned his gaze to Di Yujue and the others. In his opinion, things had not developed to this point yet. If they were only stopped, the D family's reputation would only suffer a blow. Their strength would not be damaged, and it would not be beneficial to them. Therefore, what they needed to do was to enrage the D family. As long as the D family and the guild had a conflict, the D family's strength would definitely be affected. When that time came, their crisis would be easily resolved. After Xiao Yanlong and the others stood up, the cultivators from the Xiao family and the Jun family also shouted one after another, raising the atmosphere to the extreme. The influence of the atmosphere was great, especially when everyone was in high spirits. Everyone's emotions could not help but be driven. Everyone shouted and agreed with this decision. No! Di Beichen's face was ashen. He could not accept this result at all. They had spent so much time and effort to establish the Dark Sacred Assembly. Not only did they spend a lot of money and effort to establish it, but it also represented the hope of the Dark Attribute cultivators. He absolutely could not accept this. His voice was loud and pleasant. At this moment, it was mixed with anger and roaring, revealing a kind of extreme oppression, like the ocean before a storm. It was frighteningly oppressive. Di Beichen rarely made such a sound. His voice had always been light and gentle, with a touch of magnetism, without any ripples. When Bailey Hongzhuang and the others who were familiar with him heard this, their hearts trembled. It was as if an invisible hand had grabbed their hearts, making them unable to breathe. When Lei Ming saw Di Beichen's hysterical look, the corners of his lips curled up. He wanted to let this kid know that the world was not as simple as he thought. Those forces that he thought were already pretty good couldn't even withstand a single blow from them. Young people at this age would eventually suffer setbacks. Only then would they understand that they were just a drop in the ocean. Di Beichen, I'll give you a choice. Lei Ming's eyes were indifferent. He raised his chin slightly and looked down at Di Beichen. Whether it was his demeanor or his expression, it was full of contempt and pride. Give up on establishing the Dark Sacred Assembly forever and swear on your family. As long as you swear, we can let bygones be bygones. The D family was now at the peak of its power. Although Bailey Hongzhuang had resigned from her position as the Saint of Light, her medical skills would still make her a great influence. If possible, they didn't want to face the D family and the Lin family head-on. This was because once they fought, they would inevitably suffer great losses. Impossible! Almost as soon as Lei Ming finished speaking, Di Beichen's voice rang out. He spoke very slowly, but it was filled with extreme determination. He would never give up on all of this. Chapter 61-26. It's best to end this wrong decision as soon as possible so that the entire family won't be implicated. Lei Ming and the others had a cold expression on their faces. Di Beichen was completely blinded by his sense of loyalty, or perhaps he couldn't bear the blow of failure. However, as long as one was smart, they would know that a wise man submits to circumstances. Since the outcome was already decided, there was no point in struggling. Stopping the loss in time was the wisest move. Facing those arrogant and disgusting faces, Bailey Hongzhuang's eyes flashed with a trace of disdain. Her voice was terrifyingly low. I also refuse. When these words came out, the 5 guild leaders were all stunned. They didn't expect that Bailey Hongzhuang would actually go crazy with Di Beichen at this time. This was simply digging her own grave. They really refuse a toast only to be forced to drink a forfeit. Luo Qinghao was also angry. Why bother talking to them? Let's just do it directly. Lei Ming's expression was also gloomy. Di Beichen was completely shameless. If it wasn't for the Di family and Lin family's face, he wouldn't have wasted his breath at all. Do it. Under Lei Ming's command, the practitioners of the 5 major guilds directly rushed towards the Dark Sacred Assembly's headquarters not far away. As the vigorous energy circulated, it was obvious that they wanted to directly destroy it. Stop! Di Beichen roared and his figure flew over. He would never allow everyone's hard work to go down the drain like this. After seeing this situation, Diujue and the others couldn't continue to sit below the stage. Even if Di Baichen had already told them a piece of good news last night, they still didn't relax in their preparations. The practitioners of the Di family and Lin family came out in full force and blocked the practitioners who were rushing towards the dark sacred assembly. It wasn't just the painstaking efforts of the dark attribute practitioners, it was also the painstaking efforts of their young masters. At the same time, the dark attribute practitioners had long been unable to hold back the anger in their hearts and rushed forward. It was like a black flood mixed with bright red flames. Everyone's eyes were burning with the flames of anger, burning fiercely, passionately, and crazily. They were already prepared to give up their lives. Rather than dragging out a meager existence, it was better to go all out and fight with everything they had. For so many years, they had never had the courage to resist. They felt inferior, defeated, and had never really straightened their back. But now, someone was bearing the greatest pressure for them. If they didn't even have the courage to fight for that person, then they were real cowards. An earth-shattering roar rang out as a terrifying murderous aura spread out. Even though everyone knew that these dark attribute cultivators weren't very strong, their ferocious and bloodthirsty eyes made everyone's heart tremble. This gaze was like the eyes of a devil, filled with the aura of death. Whether it was their fanatical worship of Di Baichen or their murderous intent, it was a scene that no one had ever seen before. At that moment, everyone present couldn't help but feel their hearts tremble. It was as if they had lost control of their bodies for a moment, becoming stiff and cold. Lei Ming and the others couldn't help but be affected as well. Such a scene was equally shocking to them. However, this only strengthened their resolve. These guys were the unstable factors in the upper realm. If they continued to exist, they would only threaten the entire upper realm. Instead of that, they might as well catch them all in one fell swoop. A cruel light appeared in Lei Ming's eyes. He raised his right hand high and his cold voice was clearly heard.